All right, everybody, welcome back. Another episode of Bleav in Big Ten, off and running here for you. Great to be back here with you following the first edition of the college football playoff rankings, which we are certainly going to get into. Rhett Lewis, Tom Hannafin here with you, and it's our pleasure to welcome Max Chadwick, college football analyst at Pro Football Focus and a co-host of PFF's College Football Show. Max, excited to have you, man. Thanks for being with us.
Of course, I'm a big fan of you guys, honestly, so it's pretty cool to be talking to you guys right now. So I appreciate you guys having me on.
Tom, let's hit the business, and then we'll get this thing started, brother.
Bleav in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen with the largest selection of odds on everything. Football, the NBA, college basketball, the NHL, the UFC, and other MMA events. Head to betonline.ag today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. Bleav in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here, and I bet you Rhett is going to want to start talking about Indiana in 3.
Hey,
2,
there you go,
1.
Tom.
There he goes. Yeah.
So, I mean, look, the darlings of the Big Ten this year, the darlings of college football this year, and of many a PFF stat graphic that you guys have been sending out on social media, Max. So let's start right there. What does PFF find most impressive about the Hoosiers' 9-0 run to start this season?
I mean, they've been the biggest Cinderella in college football this year. I mean, they went 3-9 last year. They hired Curt Cignetti. He obviously went nuts in the transfer portal, bringing in a lot of players, namely from his old school, James Madison. And now they've turned it around completely. And honestly, guys, if they beat Michigan this weekend, I'd almost guarantee they're in the college football playoff because they play, obviously, Ohio State and Purdue. But even if they lose to Ohio State, I think at 11-1, they have to get into a 12-team college football playoff. So it's pretty insane that, we're in week 11 of the college football season, and maybe the first team that can actually clinch a spot in the playoff is Indiana, which is just insane and shows where college football is right now. I've just been so impressed. I mean, everything, offensively, defensively. They have really good players, I'm not denying that. But really what I've been most impressed by is that they're a team. I mean, they are really just executing at such a high level everywhere right now. So I think the coaching has been outstanding. Curt Cignetti is my pick for coach of the year pretty easily, honestly. I've just been so impressed by just their execution, and it's hard to find a real weakness on their roster. I know some people are looking at their schedule and saying, oh, well, listen, they haven't really played anyone too much yet. And, well, yes, they haven't played the most difficult schedule in the country. I'm not denying that. They've also beaten every team by at least 17 points this year, right? So it's not like they're playing close games like Miami has so far this year or like some other schools. They are legitimately beating every school they played by at least 3 possessions, which is just insane for them right now. Now, this is a big test this week against Michigan, and obviously we'll learn a lot more about who Indiana is and whether or not they are a legitimate national title contender, which is, again, another crazy sentence to say when they play Ohio State. And if they win that game, if they play Oregon. But at the same time, it's just I'm so impressed with what they've done this year. And now I'd be pretty surprised if Indiana is not in the college football playoff at this point.
And Tom, let me follow that here real quick with Max, because if you go back to early in the season, Max, preseason, really, you guys were looking at all of the transfer portal position groups and ranking them. And Indiana had a player, albeit many of them from James Madison, that came over with Curt Cignetti, that were very high on that transfer portal top 10 list. DBs, D'Angelo Pons, you looked at defensive linemen, James Carpenter, Mikhail Kamara, you looked at the receivers, Elijah Surratt way up there. The running backs were up there as well, Tyson Lawton, Kalen Black. And to see how they're performing now, right, at a higher level of competition in the Big Ten, do you feel like that kind of provides some validation to the tape watchers and to what you guys are putting out there on PFF to see that translation of guys that are well thought of at their previous school to come in and continue to perform at that level?
Yeah, it provides validation for that because they obviously were very highly graded when they before Indiana, but even provides more validation for the group of 5 level. I think there's a lot of group of 5 teams now are saying, hey, look at that. Look at what Indiana's doing this year. Basically a roster that's completely made up of former group of 5 players, and they're undefeated right now and blowing everyone out of the water. So I think that's proof that, hey, there are really, really talented players at the group of 5 level. It's not like, all the best players automatically just go to the Power 5 level immediately coming out of high school. No, some guys slip through the cracks in recruiting, and that happens all the time. and they go to the group of 5 level. They dominate there. And now that we're in this transfer portal era, they're able to go up to a school like Indiana and prove, hey, this is legit what I'm doing at the group of 5 level. And now I can do it at the Big Ten level as well. So I think it's even further proof that, hey, there are really, really talented players at the group of 5 level, which makes the transfer portal that much more important because Indiana, like I said, they were one of the worst programs in the country last year. Now all of a sudden they're one of the best this year. And really it's because of just getting all these mercenaries from group of 5 schools, namely James Madison, of course, but Curtis Fork, obviously a former group of 5 quarterback. He's balling this year. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. You mentioned all those guys from James Madison already as well. Yeah, I think it's further proof that, hey, there's a lot of talent at the group of 5. It's not just the Power 4 and everyone else right now.
Don't look past the Ohio Bobcats. That's what I've been saying for decades now.
That's what we've all been saying.
Max, as we continue to digest this first round of rankings for the college football playoff, obviously the Big Ten's getting a lot of respect with Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana. One thing I saw, especially for Ohio State's victory against Penn State, so much was talked about in the lead up to that game about it's a patchwork offensive line for Ohio State. They look good against what was, apparently, it seemed to be a good front 4, front 7 for Penn State. Did you guys at Pro Football Focus learn anything specifically about Ohio State's offensive line? Because I think that was a sticking point for a lot of people in evaluating this team.
Yeah, I did. Now listen, I still think guys like Abdul Carter played really well in that game. And I think Ohio State still has an issue at left tackle with Donovan Jackson playing it. Now, Donovan Jackson, I will say, is one of the better offensive guards that we have in college football. But when you kick him out to left tackle, as for any offensive guard doing that, speed will be a problem. And especially against a guy like Abdul Carter, who's one of the best speed rushers in the country. And you saw him get around on Donovan Jackson, especially in the second half. You start to see Abdul Carter really start to come alive. What I was impressed by, though, was really actually something I wasn't impressed by for Penn State. Tom Allen sent a lot of blitzes, and I think Ryan Day and Chip Kelly did an excellent job of recognizing that. They got rid of the ball quickly into the flats. I actually was at that game. I can't tell you how many times Quinshon Judkins just leaked out to the flat, and Will Howard's able to find him immediately and beat man coverage. I don't know why Penn State blitzed so much or played man coverage so much, because that was an advantage I thought they had going into the game was a defensive line. I thought they could have rushed 4 and dropped 7 in coverage and won that way. They didn't do that. They tried to blitz a little bit more, which I don't think was really smart for Tom Allen to be doing. So, yes, the Ohio State offensive line performed better than expected, but also I think they did a great job of just beating the blitzes when they came with just short throws to the flat with Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, and other receivers like that. They didn't need to win downfield. They didn't need Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Egbuka to make too many big plays downfield. They were just taking what the defense gave them, honestly. That's why they're able to emerge victorious.
One of the other, big indicators we look at, obviously you're talking about Abdul Carter, you're talking about defense, though. When we look at the college football playoff rankings, PFF just put out the highest graded defenses earlier today in Power 4, and you got 3 of them right there in the Big Ten. Penn State's the only one in the Big Ten that's not sitting there in the top 6. You got IU as the highest graded defense in the Big Ten. Ohio State not far behind at just over 93 points, and then Oregon at 92. So, when we look at the way in which we love to evaluate offense right in this league, and a lot of those teams that I'm talking about there have really good offenses, but the defensive production, I think, has been just as impressive, especially with those 3 teams in the Big Ten right up there in the top 6, Max.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at Oregon. I mean, Oregon is coached by a defensive coach in Dan Lanning, right? Obviously, their offense is one of the best in the country. Dylan Gabriel is still a Heisman contender right now, and Will Stein is one of the best OCs that we have in college football. But Dan Lanning through and through is a defensive guy, right? So they still have a really good defense. Obviously, I mentioned before how Indiana is just offensively, defensively, special teams, and they're executing at an extremely high level everywhere right now. Penn State is a defensive team. If they're going to win games, it's going to be because of the defense. I mean, you saw Penn State's defense scored more points against Ohio State than Penn State's offense did. They scored the pick 6, and Penn State's offense only put up 6 points total after that on 2 field goals, right? So they're a defensive team, and Ohio State, I'd even argue, probably is a defensive team as well. And Ohio State obviously has a lot more talent offensively than Penn State does, which is why I think Ohio State is a legit national title contender, and Penn State probably isn't. But at the same time, Ohio State's defense is absolutely loaded everywhere. And to me, I thought Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator for Ohio State, was the most impressive part of that victory, because his game plan was perfect against Penn State. It's exactly what I would have done if I was defense coordinator. He actually did it at a way better level than anyone of us could have done it. But he had Caleb Downs and Latham Ransom, their safeties, just play a lot of too high coverages, because he knew, hey, take away Tyler Warren, take away up the middle, take away the seam route. you take away Penn State's offense. They don't have anything at receiver that can win on the outside. So what he did was just say, hey, with our talented corners, we're going to play man-on-man coverage on the outside and dare Drew Aller to make those throws to them in tight coverage. They couldn't do it. I mean, Penn State's receivers had 3 catches for 49 yards against Ohio State. That's just not good enough, honestly. So you take away Tyler Warren, you take away Penn State's offense, and I thought Ohio State did that beautifully. And yes, the offense made enough plays for the Buckeyes, but really they won that game because their defense put up a maestro performance.
You know, Max, if I could just follow on that on the Ohio State side of things with the defense, I think we talked a lot about the guys that came back, right, for another crack at this thing, right? We talk about the Jack Sawyers, the Tuimoloaus, and you know, that whole group. Denzel Burke was obviously a big name. Thought he might be in that first, second round conversation at the cornerback spot if he had come out last year. But the guy that I've been, you know, almost most impressed with on this Buckeyes defense this year is Davison Igbinosun, the quote unquote other corner, right, outside of Denzel Burke, who is, and I still don't understand how he caught that ball, that interception in the end zone against Penn State. But I'd love to get your thought on how he's kind of established himself as one of the better corners in this conference and in the country, and how that, you know, makes that Ohio State secondary almost impenetrable.
Yeah, really, and that's huge, right? I mean, you mentioned it. Igbinosun, I think he's actually the highest graded player that we had in that Ohio State Penn State game. He was elite. He was fantastic, and he had a lot of plays against Harrison Wallace, who is pretty clearly the number 1 wide receiver for Penn State, and he was doing really well against him as well, right? So that's so critical. The number 2 corner spot is so critical for any secondary because it's different than a receiving core where you could have 1 or 2 players just carry you. If you have any weaknesses in your secondary, teams are going to expose that. I mean, look at Michigan this year, right? Michigan has maybe the best corner in the country in Will Johnson, but they still are way below average in terms of coverage grade this year because they have weaknesses everywhere else in that secondary. And teams are basically just saying, okay, wherever number 2 is, avoid that guy, and we'll just expose them in other areas. Ohio, you can't do that with Ohio State, right? Because they have 2 great corners in Burke and Igbinosun. They have the best safety duo in the country and Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs as well. Other really good players in that secondary. They have no weaknesses in that secondary. I would argue it is the most talented secondary in college football, honestly. I think all those guys are going to be future NFL players, maybe future NFL starters, honestly, because it's just ridiculous how talented they are. I mean, they've already had one of the best secondaries in the country, and they added maybe the best safety in the country, Caleb Downs, in the transfer portal. Like, it's just really unfair what Ohio State secondary looks like right now. You combine that with a pretty good linebacking core and one of the best D lines in the country. You mentioned Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton, and a lot of other guys in the middle of that defensive line. That's why this may be a top 2 to 3 defense in college football, and why Ohio State is very, very much in the national title picture.
Max, before we let you go, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the number 1 team in the country, the team that's undefeated at the top of the Big Ten. It's like we kind of glossed over freaking Oregon, and it's kind of fascinating, but Oregon has quietly built and gone about its business. As we have a few minutes left here with you, what are your thoughts on their place at the top tier of college football right now? Because in my opinion, it's Ohio State, Georgia, and Oregon. There's not a big gap between those 3. What do you think?
I completely agree with that. And actually, going into the year, I said, the top 3 of college football is a gap between those 3 and everyone else. And it was those 3 right there: Ohio State, Georgia, and Oregon. And obviously, Oregon's completely earned being number 1. But I think a lot of people are saying, oh, they're clearly the number 1 team in the country. I don't think that's true. I really do. I think Oregon has its flaws, especially on the interior offensive line. They got some issues there. So I think Oregon overall is a very good team. They deserve to be number 1 in the country. I'm not denying that. But this is not like a 2022 situation where it's like, okay, who's going to beat Georgia? Like, is there anyone that could beat Georgia and prove to be it? Nobody could beat Georgia. It's not like that. There are a lot of I mean, Oregon almost lost that game to Ohio State. And honestly, you take away Jeremiah Smith offensive pass interference, they probably do lose that game against Ohio State, right? So, I do not think that there's a clear gap between them and everyone else. They deserve to be number 1. I'm not taking that away from them. They've been maybe the best team in college football this year. But at the same time, they are not unbeatable by any measure. And I still think it's a wide open race for the national title.
Last one here for you, Max, and we'll get you out of here. But in the quarterback front in the Big Conference, is this, obviously you talk about Dylan Gabriel being a Heisman Trophy contender. Curtis Rourke, probably before the injury, was working his way into that conversation. Are those the top 2 guys in your mind in PFF's view in the Big Ten Conference?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's pretty clear. I mean, I would argue those 2 are probably 2 of the top 5 quarterbacks in the nation right now. I mean, it's certainly up there. I mean, they're both playing at an extremely high level. I do think Drew Aller deserves to be mentioned in that conversation. Now, I'm not putting him above either of those two. I do think there's a gap between those two and everyone else right now. But I think Drew Aller, just talent-wise, is certainly, you could argue, he's the most talented quarterback in the Big Ten. I think I would argue he is the best prospect in the Big Ten right now for the NFL draft. But the problem is, obviously, Penn State at wide receiver just does not have enough. They really don't to really showcase the true star quarterback that they have in Drew Aller. I do think Drew Aller really is a star, but it's unfortunate for him that not enough talent in the receiving corps for Penn State to really showcase that they do have one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Because if they did, then I think we'd be talking about Drew Aller as one of the best in America right now. But I think Drew Aller is more of like a top 10 to 15 quarterback in the country. Dylan Gabriel and Curtis Rourke are playing like a top 5 level right now. So Drew Aller had probably the best NFL future of anyone in the Big Ten. But just in terms of how good they are as college quarterbacks, Dylan Gabriel, Curtis Rourke are kind of separating themselves right now.
Well, Max, one of the best in the business at covering the college game, and we sure do appreciate you, man. Thanks so much for being with us here. Look forward to catching all your great content over on PFF and on the College Football Show there with Pro Football Focus. Max, thanks again, man.
Of course. Thanks for having me on, guys.